Well, I decided to bring my analytical skills to one of my favorite shows of all time, Boy Meets World. Boy Meets World is a long-running sitcom that was aired throughout the 90s. Now the DVDs are out, and I can analyze them in detail. And it makes sense to do what Lewis Carroll said and start at the beginning, go on till I get to the end, and then stop. So I guess I'll look at the first season. I don't really like the first season. I mean, I guess it made the show, but it's really different from how the show turned out. They changed things around so much in the second season that it feels more like a completely different show with the same character names. It can be summed up as loud, obnoxious, upper-middle-class boy Corey Matthews lives next door to his teacher Mr. Feeney, and though he wants life to stay the same, is forced to confront the prospect of growing up and liking girls. The first season instrumental theme song is just annoying, and on the DVD set they decided to put it in the background of every single menu. The opening sequence is a cutesy montage of characters smiling while their actors' names are displayed at the bottom. It's done with a lot of special effects, with the videos flying around Corey along with bundles of paper and various school-themed stuff. I get the impression that this was an impressive use of technology back in the day, but it's nothing special nowadays. This coupled with the instrumental makes it come across as just annoying and way too long. I got into Boy Meets World when it aired in syndication on the Disney Channel. On Disney, they decided to use the fourth season opening instead, and I think it was a good decision. One of the biggest problems with the first season is that I just don't like the main character. He's a jerk. He's supposed to represent the average boy, or the kind of boy everyone wants to be, and that's kind of an insult. Die! As one of the popular crowd at Jefferson Elementary, he assists in humiliating the geeks. In Corey's alternative friends, a bad attempt at hair straightening sends him to the weirdo table, and he learns respect for those he used to make fun of. But that doesn't last. When the episode ends, he goes right back to harassing Minkus, the resident smart kid. Though Mr. Feeney clearly doesn't approve of it, harassment of Minkus is a big source of humor throughout the show, placing the viewer in the position of the bullying kids.
When you guys play bombardment, could you not aim the ball at my head anymore?
Deal. What's the point of playing if we can't throw the ball at its head?
Though in Model Family they make fun of Leave It to Beaver, this season of Boy Meets World actually doesn't stray that far from some of the 1950s sitcoms' themes. It emphasizes how Corey should respect his authority figures, specifically his parents and Mr. Feeney, and it strives for a sickeningly sweet sentimentality. It's definitely a 90s show though. Even though the message of respect is there, it still has an irreverent quality in between Corey learning to respect Mr. Feeney at all. And though quite conservative sometimes, it has a few liberal messages in there. Generally, you can consider there to be a scale of liberalism and conservatism, with Mr. Feeney on the far right, the Lawrence family on the far left, and the Matthews family in the comfortable center. Though Mr. Feeney is a figure to be respected, he's sometimes portrayed as too old to really understand what's best for the young generation of the 90s. In the episode On the Fence, Mr. Feeney encourages Corey's father, Alan, to make Corey work to build character, as Mr. Feeney's father did with him.
And look how I turned out. I don't want you working anymore.
One exception to the conservatism surrounding Mr. Feeney is the Marxian idea where Minkus believes it's a problem that a baseball player makes more money than Mr. Feeney because teachers provide a more valuable service, as he describes in Teacher's Bet.
Mr. Feeney is grossly and tragically underpaid.
This is a faulty comparison because the baseball players get their paychecks from private enterprise, people freely paying to see them perform, and not government. People likewise pay a lot for private school teachers, and Mr. Feeney is a public school teacher, so the blame lies with government bureaucracy rather than people valuing entertainment more than education. The Lawrence family, seen mostly through the youngest daughter Topanga, is a group of hippies regarded as weird by Corey, and the show by extension. Topanga, whose name comes from a canyon in which a writer got stuck in traffic, subscribes to some strange New Age beliefs that involve reading auras and summoning demons.
I'm channeling. I will only answer to the name.
I'm sure it's nothing like the real New Age belief system, but I don't know enough about it to comment on its portrayal. She and her family are political strawmen, used to present a ridiculous mockery of the left in order to discredit it.
None of the companies we invested in discriminate on the basis of race, sex, or bad karma.
When in Corey's alternative friends, Topanga advocates her family's custom of referring to parents by their personal names instead of the traditional respectful titles mom and dad, it automatically is treated with scorn because of the nature of the character, reinforcing the message of respecting parental authority.
See you later, Amy. Amy. Or if you prefer Mom. I told you.
Another example is seen in the father-son game, when Topanga challenges the requirement to recite the Pledge of Allegiance.
Why can't you just say it and make everyone happy?
Because if I'm forced to do it, just because it's some tradition I don't understand, then it doesn't make me happy.
Can you spell peculiar?
Corey initially defends it because of tradition, but learns the lesson that it's a gesture of respect, akin to how his parents and teachers should also be respected. Corey's family represents a happy medium, respecting authority while still being enlightened by the politics of the modern era. When it comes to feminism, the show is so-so. It's male-oriented, but it doesn't really need to be otherwise considering its premise is about a boy learning how to grow up, and mostly from the men in his life. Corey's mother, Amy, is a housewife, but she also has a job, selling real estate. It sets the tone of Amy having the comfortably traditional maternal role as homemaker, while still coming across as progressive to some extent by also having a job. Corey's sister, Morgan, is a little girl who is generally traditionally feminine, and in Corey's alternative friends, Amy does explain to her how one of her Barbie dolls has value for being a career woman, and not traditionally feminine in the way dolls usually are. Later in Boys to Mensa, Morgan defies stereotype by dressing up as a gruesome zombie for Halloween instead of a princess, which her parents support in defiance to a snooty educator. However, femininity is often denounced by the guys in the typical fashion of glorifying a certain type of masculinity, and deriding those who fail to meet its specifications. In Father Knows Less, Corey and Alan champion bad eating habits, while Amy's insistence on nutrition is cast as an annoying feminine element that they wish they could ignore. The idea that an important aspect of masculinity is eating tasty but unhealthy food to excess is pervasive in American culture, and femininity is frequently degraded along with it, as seen in the Miller Lite skirt commercial.
Just take off your skirt and I'll give you a Miller Lite.
Man up, because if you're drinking a light beer without great Pilsner taste, you're missing the point of drinking beer.
In Boy Meets Girl, Corey, and by extension the show, sees Topanga's father as incredibly weird because he cleans the house instead of his wife. When Corey attempts to recurl his hair after the straightening disaster in Corey's alternative friends, his older brother Eric uses the way Corey appears feminine when using the hair products to obtain blackmail material. In It's a Wonderful Night, Mr. Feeney dresses up in women's clothing when babysitting Morgan, which is cast as funny for more than the articles clashing with his current ensemble, and he is later seen as some random kook by a masculine guy when he forgets to take off the earrings before talking to him. It is repeatedly demonstrated that boys or men acting in a way characterized as feminine is considered bad as a matter of fact, in contrast to Morgan's zombie costume being seen as a strange but positive transgression of gender roles. This is an example of how femininity is still seen as less dignified than masculinity, and as such that girls and women acting masculine is seen as positively feminist, while boys and men acting feminine are only degraded.
Is that a sexist comment?
Additionally, there's the double standard where girls are allowed to use force against boys without being seen as too harsh, due to both boys being seen as tough enough to take it, and girls seen as weak enough to not be threatening. This is seen in the pilot episode where some classmates get into a fight, and in Corey's alternative friends, Topanga forces a kiss on Corey. If Corey were a girl and Topanga a boy, the scene in which Corey frantically tugs on his handcuffed wrist while Topanga shoves him against the locker and kisses him would be seen as sexual assault. Instead, it's only played as a cute romance. And then the description of misandristic force is allowed in Class Pre-Union, where Topanga is a straw feminist. She chooses her future occupation to be President of the United States, which wouldn't be a well-sought-after title after women bring about world peace by enslaving men. Given the way the audience cheers, I consider this line to be placed in there for the purpose of giving the female viewers an empowering joke, making this a case of writers not understanding feminism. It's not empowering. It's sick. The more this straw feminist humor is used, the less respect real feminists are given, and the real issues get ignored. Please, everyone, stop it. To get back to the whole respect for authorities thing, I generally dislike it. While Corey is often an idiot and in need of some authority figure to help him get back on the straight and narrow, I find the authoritative spirit just as often to be ageist in nature. In On the Fence, Corey is told to seek out work to pay for an expensive water gun, and due to inexperienced mistakes, ends up owing $8. Alan decides that kids shouldn't work, and tells Corey to be a kid. This idea of childhood being an age without work is relatively recent and restricted to the wealthier families. Corey was actually good at doing the job Mr. Feeney hired him for, was proud of his work, and then failed only because they made an oversight based on inexperience. If he were to do it again, he would most likely not make the same mistakes and be successful. As a kid, he does have the privilege of getting to be bailed out, but the message shouldn't be that he shouldn't work at all. It comes off like Isle of Bees' condescending military recruiter telling Jan it's a privilege she can't join up until she's 18.
Find a boyfriend. Stay up too late. Talk on the chatter. Life is short enough without rushing into combat.
It's blatant ageism.
Being able to work gives Corey power, and he shouldn't be denied it because of his age. For a different example, in the pilot episode, Corey denounces romantic love because he sees it as doing nothing but making people act irrational and cause each other pain. Mr. Feeney thinks his perspective is flawed because he hasn't experienced love himself, while Corey thinks he has a better perspective. The argument is cut down by Mr. Feeney yelling that Corey's too young to know what he's talking about. While Mr. Feeney has a valid point and is probably right, the notion that older persons of authority automatically know what they're talking about is ageist and wrong. A general Boy Meets World theme is that of friendship. Season 1 has less of this than the others, but Corey does have Sean and to some extent Topanga. Sean starts out as just a reoccurring character, and it takes until Santa's Little Helper for Sean to be labeled his best friend. In Model Family, Topanga sarcastically suggests that Corey marry him, setting off the series-wide trend of gay jokes about the two of them. While arguably a bit homophobic, I like that it focuses on them feeling awkward rather than a furious dismissal of homosexuality, as often happens with that kind of joke in other media. I'll comment on the general trend in a later analysis. Though Corey has a love interest in Topanga, their romance is not a big theme. It's more like boys acting awkwardly around girls without the reverse happening. In Boy Meets Girl, Corey is always nervous around Topanga without any sign of Topanga being nervous too. Topanga does get a crush on Eric and she loves me not, but she handles it with grace. It sort of makes sense though, as the show is from Corey's perspective. He doesn't understand girls and so doesn't see them as similarly awkward. Actually, the parents have as much of a romantic focus. Boy Meets World is interesting for not straying away from the subject of the protagonist's parents having a sex life. In Father Knows Less, Corey catches on to the implications of Amy's flirting that she's going to have sex with Alan, and he seems fine with the knowledge. On the other hand, in Once in Love with Amy, Corey is grossed out by the notion of them having sex. This is portrayed as an immature response, and Eric is cast as superior for supporting them having an active sex life. In Risky Business, though, all the boys, Eric, Corey, and Sean, are cool with the parents' romance, just critical of Amy's cheesy poetry writing skills. The main appeal of the season is how it portrays the daily life of kids in elementary school. It's stagnant and boring, and the teachers are puzzling. In Teacher's Bet, Corey tells his friends how his teacher, Mr. Feeney, is so predictable, describing his routine in detail.
Good morning, Mr. Matthews. I trust you've done the homework.
Yes, I did, sir.
But my little sister ate it. You are so predictable.
That sometimes hostile but familiar relationship is relatable. Corey has a relationship with Mr. Feeney that is often negative in nature because Mr. Feeney causes him some manner of suffering every day, even as he performs a service in education.
I'm gonna be miserable anyhow. At least this way I'm taking him with me.
But Mr. Feeney cares for his students' well-being, and that comes through. In the season finale, I Dream of Feeney, Corey wishes Mr. Feeney would get sick, but feels bad when he ends up in the hospital. Corey ends up forging a positive relationship with his teacher, thanking him for his work and providing the gift of knowledge. The acting skills of the cast vary. Generally speaking, the older actors are better than the younger actors, though I think Ben Savage was directed to be over the top as Corey, so he's harder to judge than, say, Ryder Strong as Sean. Topanga is supposed to be weird, and Danielle Fishel does a good job at that.
Mercury is in retrograde, making projects difficult to complete and causing general chaos in the universe.
William Daniels does a great job as Mr. Feeney, and he brings some depth to the character. I like the scenes where Corey and Mr. Feeney just sit and talk. I really get a sense of Mr. Feeney as having an interesting life he's not talking about, and being someone Corey could really learn from. Without a doubt, Lily Nixay does the worst job as Morgan. Though surprisingly decent in the pilot, she is awful thereafter. She kind of just says her lines quietly or loudly without a hint of authenticity.
Then how come he called me a demon child?
Mixed scenes in which she's supposed to be cute, just kind of painful to watch. They should have just stuck her in the background or replaced the actress as they ended up doing in a later entire season. This season's jokes are often kind of stupid and unfunny, despite the loud laugh tracks trying to convince us otherwise. On the other hand, I was kind of surprised how many jokes I ended up laughing at. In I Dream of Feeny, Topanga shares some psychic tips that inspire Corey and Sean to erase Minkus from existence. Though you would think it to be non-canon, the joke is rendered much funnier by Minkus not returning the next season,